This is the Miocene. This is when Florida started to come out of the water. People always say, did we have dinosaur fossils in Florida? No, we didn't. We have one. The only reason we have one is because in North Florida they did a core sample and they ran down over a mile underneath Florida, and they happened to run through the front part of a turtle from the Cretaceous period. So that would have been the dinosaur times. And that's the only dinosaur age fossil that we have in the state of Florida. Because really, our landmass didn't even start to come out of the water until 15 million years ago. So you can see we had the continental landmass up there, and then we had the little bitty pieces that went down, and they kept filling in. Now they kept filling in, and you can see, and then at the bottom of the state, they made an inland shallow sea. And one of the reasons we have so many phosphate deposits there is it was a tidal sea. So when the current was, or when the tide was up, the sea filled in. Sharks came in, some of the large whales and all that kind of stuff. Well, when the current went out, they were stranded. So then they sank to the bottom, and that's what is actually what's our phosphates made out of. That's why you have so many phosphate mines down in southwest and south central Florida. So then the Pleistocene came along, which is the one we really like anyway. And in the Pleistocene, sea levels dropped since Florida was actually, we were where, since the Ice Age was moving down, we were where all the animals were migrating to. And as the Ice Age came, it dropped our sea levels 600 feet. So you can see the landmass extended out. Florida was like 3 times as wide as it is now. So actually some of our best fossil sites now are out in the ocean. And I know you've probably seen on the news every once in a while you have a shrimp boat that'll drag along and pick up a mastodon or a mammoth tusk, and it'll lay on the deck of their boat forever because they don't know what it is, and somebody will happen to walk by and recognize it, and then the museums get involved. But yeah, a lot of times shrimpers will drag them up. They'll drag up fossils. Venice Beach, south of us, that's one of the best places in the world to get shark's teeth. It's called the shark's tooth capital of the world. And you can go down there and you can hunt. That actually was where the little sea came out on either side. When we had the tidal sea, it came out right there at Venice, and it came out on the other side of the state too. So it was like a nursery for the sharks that lived then. They had all their babies in the sea and that kind of stuff. So all the teeth, that's where you're getting all those shark's teeth, and they just continue to replenish. They're coming up out of the sand and all that kind of stuff. You can get all sorts of really neat fossils down there. You can walk along the beach and pick them up. You can scuba dive and pick up the larger ones, and literally they're laying on the bottom sometimes. You don't have to dig for them or anything. So it's kind of cool.
And that's Venice Beach?
Venice Beach. Casperson's good down there. Anywhere from Nokomis down to Venice and Serviceman's Beach, all those beaches down there you can get fossil shark's teeth on. It's fun. It's a lot of fun. Okay, some of the stuff that lived there. We had quite a few big sharks. Carcharodon megalodon is the biggest on here. You can see the little person down there in the bottom. That thing was over 60 feet long. I can't imagine, and it's a heavy-bodied shark. They were really big around too. I can't imagine a shark being that big. I mean, what's a school bus,
That's
like
30
ship. Or 40 feet long? Imagine 2 school buses back to back, and that was this shark. And if you look at the jaws down here, here's the jaws with a full-grown woman standing in them.
Look at that.
That's a megalodon jaw.
Is that a baby one?
No, that's not a baby one. That's a big one. But that's a big tooth too. See, that tooth there is probably 6.5, 7 inches. So that would have been a 65, 70 foot shark. Yeah, I never would have swam. Nobody'd go in the ocean with that thing. We wouldn't even be an hors d'oeuvre,
What do those teeth go for?
If you get a nice one like that, they can go anywhere from, you know, in good shape, $2,000, $2,500. You know, you have to pay when anything over 6 inches, the price goes up dramatically. Now here's another one that lived back then. This is a Basilosaurus. This is a whale. See, it doesn't look like the whales that we.
No, he's got the fish.
Yeah, see, they don't look like the whales that we are used to seeing, like, you know, the humpbacks and that kind of stuff. To me, that's what a whale looks like. These guys look like Loch Ness Monster to me, you know, kind of a lumpy thing. But these guys were 80 feet long. Now, see, these fed on, and they were meat eaters, they fed on small sharks, the smaller great whites, and then the bigger great whites could take out the juveniles of these. So they were both, you know, kind of there was a cross dependency there for food. So they would eat each other, but they were just giant animals. Now that was what lived in our oceans. On land, we had different kinds of horses. Now these are the three-toed horses. We had horses here from the Eocene, which was a horse the size of a fox. And they had toes then, because they were more of a forest dweller, and they had to be able to run away from prey, so they needed something where they could get some traction, so they had toes instead of, you know, just a single hoof, because they were more in the forest. And they had 4 toes in front and 3 toes in back, the little Eocene guys. I'll show you a chart in a minute, and it'll show you them. So these were old, bigger ones. There's some of the little guys.
How would they know they had stripes on the one that you showed?
They don't. That's just like the dinosaurs. They want to put feathers on them now. Nobody's looked, you know. You can't really say that that's what they had, and now they're making them all different colors too. So, you know, it's just
Okay.
individual interpretation. Okay, here's the chart that shows the little guy. He's the Eocene horse, the Dawn horse. We had him here. Now, where we find his fossils are, you remember in the 15 million year ago chart where it showed just the little islands? Those little pieces would have been Eocene, and that's where we find some of the little guy's fossils. And then as you go up the species, you can see that the toes recede, the side toes, until you get to the horse up at the top where it's got a hoof, and they just have the little splint bones, you know, on the side. But it's interesting to me that they were the size of a terrier, you know, the little guys, and then they, you know, evolved into what they are now.
Especially into yours.
Here's another picture of him. But there he is compared to a regular horse.
Looks like Ben.
It does kind of
So
look like him.
kind of like, you know how you think of it as going from large to small, this
Uh-huh.
is the opposite.
Yeah, these guys were the opposite. A lot of people say, well, why don't we have a lot of those Pleistocene animals around now? Well, the problem was food supply. You know, they were so big, and they would have to have so much food to feed them that, you know, as the earth evolved, they could not maintain, you know, their body status. So, I mean, we couldn't support elephants in Florida anymore, you know, or some of the giant camels. And we had a glyptodont. Now, he was a cool guy. This thing is perfectly armored, its body, so apparently it was a pretty good prey animal. His body's armored, his tail's armored, he's got an armor cap on his head. Now, his carapace was over 6 feet across. So these guys are the size of a VW. You know, the little beetles? How'd you like to hear that thing coming through the palmettos, you know? That would have been scary. Here's another picture of him. And here's him compared to people. Because they did find, they have found butchered marks on some of the bones. So they do know that the Native Americans back then did eat them. That was one of the prey animals. And some of them even had clubs on the end of their tail for defense. They're like a mace. It was like a mace on the end of their tail. So anybody that did mess with them got a mouthful of bony mace. But I don't think that would have stopped some of them. Like the cave lion. Here's the cave lion. He was a big fella. This guy measured 8.2 inches long, the big ones. They weighed up to 930 pounds.
Wow.
This was a big animal, a big cat. Then we also had the,
Leslie would have had one if they were still
we had the
around.
jaguar here as well, Panthera onica, and this one, now they were about 25% larger than the jaguars are today. So that would have been standing 3 feet high at the shoulder, being 6 feet long, and weighing 330 pounds. So here's another reason you didn't take the trash out in the Pleistocene. Somebody need ya. We had giant ground sloths. This was Eremotherium. He was the biggest. There was actually 3 different sloths here. There was Jefferson sloth, Harlan sloth, and this Eremotherium, the big guy. He would stand, his length, his body length was 20 feet. He could stand 14 feet high, and when he was just down, you know, on all fours, he would be 7 foot high at the shoulder. This was a massive animal.
What did he eat?
He was a plant eater.
Anything he wanted.
Yes, he was a plant eater. They weighed 7 tons. They were 14,000 pounds. And in this picture, you can see how big he was next to the man. And then you can also see the 2 glyptodonts on either side.
Where is the man?
Right here.
In the middle
See him in the
there.
middle?
The man in the
And these
middle.
are the glyptodont, and these are the other 2 sloths, the Harlan and Jefferson sloth. And that's a giant armadillo. They weren't any slouches either. They were 5 feet long. So these were all big animals back then. We also had otters, capybaras, and beavers. Castroides was the extinct giant beaver. He grew 7 feet long, a beaver, 7 feet long, and weighed 279 pounds. You know, that's a huge beaver. You know, he could cut down any tree he wanted. We had otters, the extinct otters. They stood 2.5 feet at the shoulder, and they weighed over 400 pounds. And then we had capybara that they're around now in South America. They died out here in the Pleistocene. But they weighed in at a ton and were 4 feet high at the shoulder. That's a giant rodent.
Oh, God.
Here he is. That's the capybara. There's your beaver. Here's one of my favorites. This is the terror bird. It's called the Titanus walleri. And this thing was huge. Does anybody know what a caracara is? Okay, this was like a caracara. It was a predator. And it was 4'6" to 6'2" feet high. So a 6 foot high bird. And it weighed 330 pounds. And it could, run like an ostrich. I mean, I just can't imagine, walking across your yard and having that thing chase you. And you can see on the bottom that saber cat didn't do too well with him either. Now the elephants, we had several types of elephant. We had mastodon. That's these guys. They were 16 feet in length, and their tusks could be 16 feet rather. Now they didn't curve upward as much as the mammoth tusks did. They were more straight. But the mastodon stood almost 11 feet high at the shoulder, and he weighed 10 tons. He was 20,000 pounds. And he was smaller than the mammoth. The mammoth, he was 13 feet at the shoulder, and he weighed 12 tons. I just can't imagine a 22,000 pound animal. I mean, that walked on land. That's crazy.
Was the main distinction the shape of the tusk?
No, their teeth, actually. I'll show you the next slide. Their teeth were the main distinction to tell them apart.
Oh, good grief.
Which one was older?
They're both were at the same age.
Same time.
Uh-huh. But you can see the teeth on the mammoth. It kind of reminds me of a tire track on the top. The layers of dentin in the teeth. And the mastodon teeth are cusped like ours. See how it has the cusps on them? That's the difference in the 2 elephants. Now the interesting thing about elephants is they only have 2 teeth on either side of their jaw. This is one tooth, here's a tooth, here's a tooth, here's a tooth. So they only had 4 or 8 teeth on their head at any one time.
Oh, good grief.
So it's kind of interesting. Now the saber cat is everybody's favorite.
You got it.
Here he is in all his glory. And the interesting thing about these guys is their jaws could unhinge to 120 degrees, which allowed them to use those saber teeth. Now those teeth could be 7 inches long. And what they don't show you here is there's a blood groove that runs along the outside here on these teeth. And it was made for when they stab those teeth into something, they don't have to take them out. They leave the teeth in, and then the animal can bleed out while they're standing there.
Oh.
So one of their favorite prey were those giant ground sloths, because those sloths were slow. And they'd jump on their back, and they'd stab them in the back of the neck, and they'd start bleeding out. And the sloth wasn't smart enough to reach behind him and throw the cat off. He'd just lay down and die. So that was one of their favorite foods. Here's some more pictures of him. And they were heavy bodied. The interesting thing about them too is it was a heavier bodied cat than the lions and tigers we have today. Their body weight, they were just heavier. They had shorter legs, but they had more power than the cats today. Now they stood 39 inches at the shoulder, and a Bengal tiger stands 35 to 43 inches.
Were they more like bobcats, really big-footed and
Yeah,
everything,
kind
short-tailed and
of,
everything?
yes, more like a bobcat body type, but it was a 620-pound bobcat.
Nice.
Yeah,
You would have had one of them.
not me. But you can see, looking at the man, how big it is. So, and it wasn't a slouch. I mean, they were incredible predators. Okay, we had paleo llamas and camels here in prehistoric times. That's the llamas. And they were 7 feet high at the shoulder. And there's one of the camels. They don't really look like the camels today. That's a prehistoric camel. But and one thing about the land in the Pleistocene, which is interesting, because the Ice Age pushed everything down here. So Florida really resembled the plains of Africa today. We had so many deer and so many antelopes. We had all of the grassland and all of the grassland animals, the elephants, the sloths, all that stuff. So it's really interesting, our past. And the nice thing about collecting fossils here is we don't have to dig them out of rock. They're laying in the mud or in the dirt, and they're just waiting for somebody to discover them. The nice thing is to be going along the bottom and pick up one of those giant shark's teeth and know you're the first person that's seen it, in 15 million years. And another favorite is the dire wolves. These guys, they were about the same size as gray wolves. There wasn't a lot of difference there. Most of the prehistoric animals that we find are 25 to 30% larger than their counterparts if something survived through to today. These guys were not that. These were about 150 pounds. They were, however, their skull and their teeth matched those of the wolf, of the current wolves. They were larger and they had a greater shearing ability, and the bite force of these guys was stronger than any known wolf species. So these were some tough wolves. And I know you've seen them all in Games of Thrones. We had a couple of bears. We had a cave bear, which was comparable to the largest Kodiak bears at over 2,000 pounds. And when he stood up 20 feet tall. That was a heck of a bear. And then we...
I'm only 6.
And then we had the Florida spectacled bear. I found a lot of pieces of him. And he was called a short-faced bear. He kind of has a pug face, he looked like a little bulldog. But he still stood 9 feet high when he stood up on his back legs. He was 1,500 pounds, so he wasn't a small bear either. here's one of my favorites. I love those terror birds and I love this hell pig. This is a nasty looking thing, isn't it?
Yeah.
This was a prehistoric pig that was taller than a horse and could take down animals as large as a rhino. It weighed 2,000 pounds and had arm-sized fangs. Its fangs were like, your forearm. Despite its nickname, hell pig, he wasn't really a pig, but he was related to hippos and whales. Here's another picture of him. He was not an attractive animal. But that's another thing, you could be walking across the grasslands and have one of those things come running up.
No thanks.
Yeah. We also had bison. We had rhinos.
Bison?
Yep, we had bison antique was here. At home, I've got a skull cap of a bison with the two horns, the two horn caps. And it's a juvenile, but it's about this big.
So you found in Florida?
This one was actually found in Missouri, out of the river. But same thing, they lived here. Bison antique they were 7.5 feet tall at the shoulder, and they were 15 feet long. They weighed 3,500 pounds. That's a big bison. The rhinos, Teloceros, they looked more like hippos, and they had large, heavy bodies. You can see how squat his body is, and he had little short legs. But they were about the size of today's rhinos. The bear dogs, they were interesting. It was 8 feet long and weighed 1,400 pounds, and they called them bear dogs because they had the tenacity of the dog, but they had a strength of a bear. And I got a picture of one of those. They're kind of interesting. There's the bear dog next to a guy.
Looks like a lion.
It does kind of, doesn't it? It's got a mean-looking face on it, that's for sure. But that was just an example of some of the animals that lived here. What I want to do now is pass out some fossil sheets to you guys with a group of fossils, and you get to identify what your fossils are based on your fossil sheets. I also brought Venice Beach Matrix for you, which is if you go down to Venice Beach and are hunting for shark's teeth, then this is a little sample of that. You'll find a bunch of shell, and then there's little fossils in there too, so you can tell me what you got. But we'll pass that out right now.